Alright guys, gonna do an arrow build. I guess it's kind of a how-to, just how I go from blank east and axis. Obviously this will work with any arrows. But from blank arrows, I cut my own wraps, I make my own footers. I'm gonna show all that in this video. And it might be a couple days because I still haven't received my feathers. But for the time being, is I can at least get these arrows from their current status up to the point where I'm just gotta fletch them. So that's probably gonna be this first half, and we'll go from there. And I'll zoom in when I need to zoom in, and hopefully you guys enjoy. And if you can see the clutterness of my workbench slash computer desk, I apologize. But hope you guys enjoy, and hopefully it helps. Alright guys, so general arrow build. I've got some 1914s right here for the footers. Easton Axis 400s. I'm going to leave them full length for this bow. I've got a bear shaft upstairs that flies really well. Got my vinyl for my wraps. I've got some 4-inch natural parabolic feathers in yellow from Wild Fletching coming at the moment. These should be some good arrows. These happen to be match grade. I just found them for a good deal, so that's what I picked up. Like I said, normally I shoot the Axis traditionals, but I figured I'd give these plain Jane ones a whirl, and you know what? It's almost like they're the same thing without the traditional coating on them. So we'll start up here. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut my wraps. Just to give a few examples, this arrow, it's I don't know, some sort of green I got off Amazon. I always look for Oracle 651 permanent vinyl. I don't know what the permanent stands for, but some of them have that listed in the title and some don't. So I always look for the permanent because I've had really good luck with it. But this is a 6-inch wrap. It works really well for 4-inch feathers. I think on these new arrows I'm going to be doing a 7-inch wrap just to get a little extra. For instance, on my traditional arrows, I got a half a dozen here I haven't made up. What I do is I cut a 7 5/8 wrap, and that puts the end of the wrap right here at this cresting, and it kind of makes it look fancier than the arrow actually is, so to speak. It kind of looks like you crowned it and then crested it. So just something to keep in mind if you like a good looking arrow. So that's one of the advantages of cutting your own wraps, is you kind of get to do your own thing. So I'm going to stop recording this section and then I'll pick up with a new recording. Okay, so to cut your own wraps, all I have is this little cheap paper cutter. Works fantastic. This is a 6-foot roll of that Oracle 651 in yellow. This is like $6 to $10 depending on the color on Amazon. And I know I've seen it at like local craft stores, so it's a fantastic deal. So basically what it is it's 12 inches wide. So what I do is I throw it into the paper cutter, and however long I want my wraps to be on my arrows is the length I cut off. So I want 7-inch wraps. So I'm going to go to the 7-inch mark on my paper cutter. Make sure everything's nice and square, and give it a cut. So now you have your roll you can put to the side, and you have a 7-inch wide section of vinyl. So then you flip it over, and then you put it back in the paper cutter. Obviously, it'll be a little cumbersome to work with when it's fresh off the roll. And then you figure out how wide you want your wraps to be. For these Axis, I go the hash mark under a 1-inch mark, and that leaves a decent overhang. It's probably wider than it needs to be. These Axis are 204 inner diameter, so they're fairly skinny shafts. So that works well for me, and luckily I can get a full dozen out of one 7-inch strip. Depending on how wide you go, you might have to cut a second one of these, but there's so much vinyl in that roll that I don't know how many wraps you can get off of one. I've never actually gone through one, so you can get a whole bunch. But then this process is pretty simple. You just cut your wraps out, and this is probably, you know, pennies on the dollar as far as overall cost versus buying a dozen wraps for 20 bucks or something like that. So cheap, effective. I've had great luck with this material. I use and abuse my arrows and haven't really had any failures I can think of. The other nice thing about this material is it comes off arrows really easy, so if you want to refletch, just take a dullish knife that still kind of has an edge, scrape one straight shot through the wrap, and then it peels right off, and works pretty nifty. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the rest of these. I don't know if I'm going to do a full dozen arrows. I think I only have 10 of those shafts left because I've got one fletched already that I was testing. I got my bare shaft, and then I had an incident while bare shafting on one I had already cut too short anyways. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this up, and I'll be back for the next step. Alright, so the next step is going to be shaft preparation. For me, I just use rubbing alcohol. Pretty simple. This is for the wraps, keep in mind. You alcohol them pretty frequently throughout this process. But I just put them under my armpit, give the area that's going to be getting the wrap a decent little coating. I don't get too carried away. The wrap seems to adhere really well. But it is pretty impressive how much you get off of them. So definitely a worthwhile step to do in the process. I will do it at this point, and I will also then rubbing alcohol the wrap before fletching. Alright, so we're rubbing alcohol for the wraps, and we'll hop over to that section. Alright guys, so we're on to the wrapping stage. I've already done 2. I will show you the 3rd one. What I want to show you real quick is, so both of these arrows currently, let me zoom in, the nocks are orientated the same way. Let's see if we can get it to zoom here. Yeah, there we go. So these nocks are orientated the same way, and as you can see, the word axis is also orientated the same way. So that's not necessary. That's kind of something I do because it's not that hard to make it happen. So to put a wrap on, fairly self-explanatory. I like to use a book or a magazine. A traditional themed book or magazine obviously adds to the help. Take your wrap. The longer these sit, the flatter they'll lay. It's not an issue doing it right away, but it's just something you might want to consider. But I just cut these a couple minutes ago, and they're already laying on the book pretty flat. So what I like to do is I kick it over to the edge of the book, so I have a nice hard edge. Take one of your arrows. Now with these axis for myself, if I put the word axis pointing straight up at the start of the wrap, the seam ends up where I like it, so then when I knock my arrow, the word axis is still pointing straight up. So that's what I do. It's not necessary, but if you want everything to look unison, it helps. So all you do is you line up your knock seam the best you can with the edge of the wrap. Should be pretty good right there. And then I kind of lift and drop the point end onto the wrap itself. Give it just a little turn so it sits on the arrow like that, and then you just run your thumb up and down until you're all the way around it, and then I take this special tool because axis nocks are tight, line it up with the seam, and then when you're on the string, the term axis is pointing straight up. So pretty nifty. I'll go through and do the rest, and works great. Alright, so this next part, we're going to take our cut footers and clean up the edges. You can use something like a bastard file, any type of sandpaper. Basically, when you cut them, it doesn't leave a clean edge. I'm trying out something new right here. I'll show you guys. Works pretty good. I've already done these two. I would have showed the cutting of these footers, but it did not go as planned because the arrows I bought were 1914s, and it turned out I needed 1916s, and I had some laying around that were already cut on a previous arrow build, and there wasn't a lot of arrow left. And with my cutting system, which is an arrow saw that my dad made, you can only cut until that arrow is so short, so I had to get a little creative. But you can either use an arrow saw, a Dremel, pipe cutter. There's a lot of ways to cut aluminum arrows. So just find a length you like. I personally do 1.25 inches, and I just think it's aesthetically pleasing and it seems to work really well. But basically what I do for this next step is I find an insert that is approximately the right size, and or the insert that comes with the arrows. I scuff one up, that way I get a nice tight fit, and then I chuck the insert in a drill with a field point. And then what I've been doing to square them a little better and clean up the ends is I have these hit insert sander disc things that come with the insert. Hold that with my pair of pliers and just run the drill, and that seems to be squaring them off and cleaning them up pretty good. So I'm just gonna run through the dozen. You gotta be careful. Sometimes these get a little tight on your insert. But I'm gonna run through the dozen real quick, and I'll be back for the next step of the footers. Alright guys, next step in the footer process, I like to taper the back side, so the side that's going to be facing the nock. So same general process, stick it on the end of that insert, take a bastard file, and you kind of set the angle, try to be consistent throughout the dozen, but you just run the drill. Back and forth on the bastard file, and it tapers it quite nicely. So I will finish up the rest, and then I'll be back for the next step again. Alright, so the next step's probably the easiest step. Still using the bastard file. Basically what you have is when you cut and just tapered them, you have a little lip on the inside. So I just take the back end of the bastard file, slip the footer over it, and just give it a couple twists, and that just cleans out that little burr. When you're on the taper side, you want to be a little careful, because if you put too much pressure, you'll end up flaring it back out. So just want to be careful and just do it nice and gingerly, and just kind of work through the dozen. And this will let the footer slip on the shafts much easier, and let the epoxy get underneath the footer and between the arrow. So glue is key with these. I have found the best glue for myself has been 5-minute Gorilla Glue. I'll show it to you here in a second. I'm gonna work my way through this dozen real quick, and we'll be on the next step. Alright, so next step in the process, I have this little wire brush. Works twofold. Sometimes I'll give the inside of the footer a little bit of scrape, and then I also take it and just score up the first inch or so of the shaft, and this just allows the glue to have a better surface area to grip onto. So I'm going to do that through the whole dozen shafts, or the 10 or so I'm making. And then the next step, which I won't show just because it's really simple, is take a Q-tip, clean out the inside of your footers with rubbing alcohol, and clean the end of your shaft with rubbing alcohol as well. And then we'll be on the next part. Alright, so the next part of the footers is to obviously glue them on. I'm just going to do this one for now, and then I'm going to go through and get everything prepped and get everything to the same point. So how I glue them, I like to have some paper towel on hand, and I use this 5-minute Gorilla Glue epoxy. I find it works really well. Best out of the glues I've used so far anyways. So let's see, that's about centered. Obviously, this part's pretty self-explanatory. Get the glue down there. Don't need a ton, especially for just one arrow. Get that capped off. I like to use a toothpick. Mix up the glue. I always let these sit overnight, so normally this is actually the last step in the process for me, is gluing on footers, and then the next day I can shoot them. But I don't have my feathers yet, so we're going in kind of a weird order here. So what I do, get a good little scoop on the toothpick, and about the bottom inch or so, give a good cover on the shaft. Like I said, I've already cleaned this with rubbing alcohol. So we got a good quantity on there. And then what I like to do, I'll zoom in so you can see this a little better. Probably a little too much. I stick the footer on, make sure your tapered end is going towards the nock, and then I twist the footer back and forth, and I just kind of work it up the shaft and down the shaft, and I will make sure, try not to get glue on you, I will make sure I am seeing glue underneath the shaft on the front side of the footer, and that lets me know that the entire bottom side of the footer has glue across it. So then what I do is I push the footer about a 1/4 inch overhang off the front of the shaft. You take your paper towel and clean off your excess glue, and then push your footer down. And that's about the tidiest way I have found to do this, with no real excess glue, and you get a nice square bottom and a nice clean fit and glues throughout the whole thing. And I've had very few of these move on me, and I think most of the time it's because I either didn't do that good enough, or for instance, sometimes if you don't clean out the footer, or if your footer is too tight of a tolerance, you don't get enough glue underneath. So that's when I really started to adapt that, slide it back and forth until I definitely had glue on the front side, and then I know the whole thing is coated. So that's how I glue on a footer. And up to this point, we've wrapped them, footed them, made the footers. So I hope this is being helpful. Like I said, this is going to progress. You'll probably see me the next day. This will probably all be one video. Hopefully this is good for you, and on to the next step. Alright guys, it's the following morning. Got all the footers glued on. I'm going to do a quick insert glue on demo. I use hot melt. This is the big gym stuff. I already got a few glued in. So basically, when I use hot melt, I always have a bottle of water with me. And basically, I don't know if it does anything, but ever since I started to like rapid cool the hot melt, I have a lot less issues with it. And my personal opinion and why I use hot melt is because it seems like most glues suck, to be honest, and at least hot melt has the ability to be reversed, and it's really easy to repair. So that's why I've gone to hot melt. I don't seem to have a significantly higher failure rate in the first place. I'd like to apologize. I'm doing a load of laundry, so if you hear something in the background. Yeah, I don't have a higher failure rate, so I don't see any negative negative issues with using hot melt. So we're going to go ahead and glue an insert in for you. This is how I do it. Not saying it's the best way, but it's how I do it. So I'm using 100 grain brass inserts. I don't personally clean them. I was once told that extra grit kind of helps hot melt, and I kind of believe it, and I'm kind of lazy. So Yeah, so take your footed arrow shaft. I like to glue the inserts in after the footers. You can do it either way. It's just the end of the arrow shaft stays a lot cleaner if you glue the footers on first. So I just use a little propane torch, get a little flame going. Let's see if we can catch it just a skosh. There we go. Yeah, get a little flame, nothing too much. Take your hit insert installer or whatever you if you're just using standard inserts, I like to just screw a field point onto all of them. Heat up the glue a little bit. I like to do a pretty heavy coat. I know most of it just gets wasted, but gives myself confidence. So as you can see, got a pretty good coat of glue on there. I then put the insert in the flame like so. I get it pretty hot, probably hotter than it needs to be. Ramrod it into the arrow, and then as quickly as I can, I dump it in a thing of water. And I've done it this way for a long time. I've never had a carbon failure or anything like that because of it. One nice thing about the footers is if you do, maybe cause a little bit of damage, you're not going to notice it as much. And then the other nice thing about the aluminum is the excess glue pops right off. But like I was saying earlier, I don't know if rapid cooling, the hot melt, helps, but ever since I started doing that, I almost have 0 failures with the hot melt. And like I said, if I ever need to, I can just put a field point in, heat up the field point, the heat will transfer down the shaft, break that bond with the hot melt, and then I can pop it out and change weight if I want to. So that's why I've gone to hot melt, and I hope that helped, guys, and we should be fletching next. Alright guys, we're on the final step here. We're going to be fletching. I've already gone ahead and done a few to show you an example. They're already in my quiver. They fly awesome, which I already knew they were going to because I had a bare shaft and another one fletched up. But they look good, got a decent amount of helical on them. We'll go ahead and fletch these last 2 up. I don't know how much I will show because it's kind of repetitive for you guys. Generally speaking, I use a Bitzenberger jig. It's already fine-tuned for an axis with a 4-inch Wild Fletching. By the way, if you guys are looking for good feathers, Josh over at Wild Fletching has some awesome ones. They're natural turkey feathers, pre-dyed and whatnot. So if you guys are looking for feathers, a little shout out to Josh at Wild Fletching. But anyways, this jig's a Bitzenberger already set up for these arrows. The general concept in which you are looking for when setting your jig up is good feather contact from the front of the feather all the way down, obviously. One thing you have to decide, for me personally, I like my feather to be at that very last hash mark on the clamp. So that's one thing you're going to be doing consistently. But what I like to do is I get everything on the arrow, make sure everything's happy. I have this credit card I filed off corner, I taped over it so you guys can't see it obviously. But what I like to do is make sure everything's happy, make some minute adjustments if necessary. And then I use this credit card just to get a nice, decent little gap between the clamp itself and the feather. I'll get what I'm looking for here and then I don't know if you guys can see that super well, but there's just an ever so slight gap between the actual quill and the clamp, and that just allows you a little bit of almost a spongy area so it really lays down good. And then once you're at that point, I use just your basic Loctite super glue. There we go. And I don't put on a huge coat. Basically what I do, take the clamp off. I'll zoom in here. Bear with me. I realize I should have done this video with a cameraman. It's kind of difficult doing it yourself. So I put the clamp right into my chest. And then I run a bead of glue kind of sparingly down the whole quill, so you can kind of see how it's blotted down there and it's not this one nice bead. So what I then do is take the end of the glue bottle here and I just kind of spread it around, making it so it's completely covering the quill, but you don't get a ton of excess this way. I've tried the brush on Gorilla Glue, which is awesome, but I think it leaves such a fine coat of glue that sometimes if your quill contact on the arrow isn't perfect, it doesn't end up great. So then I got this quill completely coated. So go back to your jig over here, zoom back in. What I like to do is take my clamp, stick it on the magnet, make sure you are in a detent on your jig. I like to push the back of the clamp up against the butt side of the jig, and then I place the knock side of the feather down, and then I lean the front side of the feather down onto the arrow, and then I take my card again and just do a nice swipe down the whole quill on top, pushing down, and then that's pretty much the process for gluing a feather. This super glue dries fairly quick, so I do like a minute clamp time. Normally I'm listening to some tunes, so I just kind of do it at will. But yeah, I will come back at you when this one's dry, and we will do the next feather again, and then from there I'll probably whip out this arrow and show you the finishing touch. Okay, so I already have the clamp off. The feather is on here nicely. So what I'm going to do is you just turn your dial to the next spot, and I like to give it a good little shake when I reach the next detent to really make sure it's settled in there, because nothing's worse than when your feathers aren't perfectly offset from each other and you feel like a real dork afterwards. So at this point, that feather is good to go. So you want to grab your next feather in line here, and then just repeat the process. Line it up in your clamp where you like it. As far as where to put the feather in the clamp, that's pretty much personal preference. I like there not to be a huge gap between my fingers and the feather. So I run it really close, closer than some. And then I also have some, I get pretty picky about how my feathers line up in the jig. So I like to pay attention to the rear side, the knock side of the feathers, to make sure those are perfectly lined up. Because your feathers might be, you know, 1/16 to an eighth inch length difference, just because it's the nature of the beast. So I like to have the knock side lined up, because that's where I'm more visually seeing. So I'll take it and take a couple peeks, make some minute adjustments, and take a few looks different ways, and then put that little gap in there. I like the way that looks. Pop it off, swing you guys this way. Put the coat of glue down. One reason I like this glue is if you're not footing your arrows, or if you've already footed your arrows ahead of time, this glue, I mean, I could shoot this arrow in 20 minutes from now if I wanted to, and I wouldn't have any issues. So that's good. Got the nice coat of glue all the way across the quill, if you guys can happen to see that. I'll swing you back this way to the jig. Plop her on the magnet. Butt her up against the jig on this side. Contact the quill. Pull it down forward. Make good contact. Credit card. Nice little swoop. Call it good. And like I said, with this glue, I only give it maybe a minute, so I'll go ahead, do the next feather, and then I will show you the finishing process like I said. So after the next one, I'll be back and I will show you what I do to finish off the fletching part, and then after that, arrows are pretty much done and ready to rumble. So season starts October 1st here, so we're getting dialed in, so I'll be back. Alright guys, so got the last feather on. Looks pretty stellar. So how I finish off my fletching, I'll zoom in here, and I just I like to do a couple dabs of glue on both the leading edge and the trailing edge. Let me zoom a little bit further out here. So I get kind of persnickety about this. I do my best to make it a very minute amount of glue. Let me clean off. There we go. What you don't want to do, and what I did when I was younger making arrows, is I would get so much glue on here that like the front 1/4 inch of the feather would end up being hard, and it would cause this really big ramp area that would hit the riser. So I do my best just to get a nice little dab right at the front here, and I kind of like to get a dab going and then I kind of drag it so I don't get this big buildup. Now the nice thing about this glue is you got to kind of trust it, because it'll look like it's building up on you and it's going to dry in this big blob, but it actually kind of settles and flattens down. And then I like to do the same thing on the back side here. Just a nice little couple blobs. Sorry about the shakiness. Had a little bit of caffeine today. Gotta love being a mechanic. So, I'll see if we can get this to focus. I doubt it. Almost. There we go. So you can just see those couple blobs right there, and like I said, those will settle down and flatten out, and then you probably can't even see the front ones because the front ones are really minute. There you go. But this turns out really clean, and if you're picky about your arrows, it works really, really well. So I think on that note, guys, that's pretty much the whole arrow build. If you guys have any questions, obviously leave comments below. Other than this, just shoot them and have fun, and if you guys are hunting this year, good luck out there, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you guys have any other tutorials you want to see, let me know. I'd be happy to do them, and hope you guys enjoyed this. Thanks for watching.